I never planned to open my kitchen table to a stranger's ghost story. But this one found me anyway, the way the good ones always do, sliding in sideways through a name I half remembered and a town I had never visited. It begins with a young woman standing outside a courthouse with a purse too light for the trouble she was in, and a stranger under a gas lamp who was far older than he looked. What she was chasing was an answer about her father. What she found instead was a promise made 2 centuries before she was born, and a man who had spent that time learning how to disappear in plain sight. I will not tell you how it ends, only that it starts with fear, and somewhere along the road, without either of them agreeing to it, that fear turns into something neither one of them has a name for yet. Settle in. This one takes its time. The rain over Hartwell Falls had stopped some time before dawn, though the courthouse steps still held their puddles under the gas lamps, each one glowing faintly orange against the gray morning. Wynne Calder stood at the bottom of those steps with a worn leather purse clutched against her ribs. Inside it was enough money for a few more nights at a boarding house, a little food, and one decision she had been putting off for 3 weeks. Her father had died at his writing desk on a Tuesday evening, and the physician who examined him said simply that his heart had failed, as though a heart could fail a man like Wynne Calder without a reason behind it. The lawyer who arrived at the house the next morning, a thin and unhurried man named Silas Merrow, informed her that the house itself belonged to the bank, that the mortgage had been called in, and that she had 30 days to remove her belongings. 2 days after that conversation, someone slid a folded note beneath the door of the room Wynne now rented on Larkspur Street. It said only 4 words: "Stop asking your questions." She had not stopped. The second warning came at the market, where a man in a long dark coat followed her through 4 separate streets, never speaking, only making certain she noticed him before he finally turned a corner and vanished. That was the morning Wynne decided she needed protection, whatever the cost, however strange the request might sound to anyone she asked. Inside the Hartwell Falls employment office, a narrow room that smelled of ink and old paper, a clerk named Mr. Hollis studied her request with a deepening frown. "You are asking for a private guard," he repeated, as though she might have meant something else. "Yes," she said. "For how long?" 4 days, perhaps 5. "Most people who come through this door are looking for cooks or drivers or house staff, Miss Calder." "I am not most people," she answered. He glanced toward her purse without quite meaning to. "Can you pay?" "I can pay part of it now." "That is not the same answer." "It is the only answer I have." Mr. Hollis leaned back in his chair, and for a moment Wynne thought he intended to refuse her outright. Then his gaze drifted past her shoulder toward the window, and something in his expression shifted. A man stood outside beneath the office awning, tall and unnaturally still, dressed in a long black coat with white hair tied loosely at the nape of his neck. His skin held a pallor that was not sickness, more like moonlight settled permanently into flesh. He watched the street the way a man watches a room he expects trouble to enter. Mr. Hollis lowered his voice. "He came in yesterday, said his name was Cassian Vane. Claims he has done security work for wealthy families abroad. Do you believe him?" "I believe he knows how to make people leave him alone." "That may be enough for what I need," Wynne said, and stepped back out into the cold. The stranger did not turn as she approached, though she was certain he had heard her the moment she left the building. "Mr. Vane," she said. "That is the name I gave them," he answered, his voice low and unhurried, careful rather than cold. "I am in need of a bodyguard. That is rarely good news for the person saying it. I was followed yesterday, twice." "By whom?" "I do not know." "What do they want from you?" "I do not know that either." He looked at her then, and Wynne found herself caught by the color of his eyes, a deep red brown that seemed almost black, except when the weak morning light struck them directly. She told herself it was only the season, only the strange gray light of a town still drying out from the rain. "My father left something behind," she said. "Someone believes I have it. Do you?" "No. That makes your situation worse, not better. I am aware." He studied her for a long moment, the way a man reads a document he suspects is not quite honest. "How much can you offer?" $20 for 4 days of your time. "I can give you 15 now and keep 5 for food." "You should keep all of it for food," he said. "I can manage." "You think you can manage?" "That is a different claim from actually managing." She tightened her grip on the purse strap. "Will you take the work, or will you not?" Something close to amusement crossed his face, gone before she could be certain of it. "Yes," he said, "I will take it." Wynne counted the money into his open palm, and his fingers, when they brushed hers, were cool as river stone in autumn. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "The Sparrow House on Larkspur Street." "I will meet you there within the hour," he said, and something in the flat certainty of his voice made her believe him completely. though she could not have explained why. As she started down the courthouse steps, he spoke again. "Miss Calder." She turned back. "How did your father die?" "They said his heart stopped," she answered. "And you do not believe that, no?" Cassian closed his hands slowly around the folded bills. "Neither do I," he said. Wynne should have asked him why, should have pressed until he explained himself. But instead, she simply walked away, carrying less money and more hope than she had held in 3 long weeks. Behind her, Cassian waited until she had disappeared around the corner of Larkspur Street before crossing to where a newspaper boy stood shivering near the corner post. "Take a message to the house on North Ridge," he said, pressing a silver coin into the boy's palm. "Give it to the woman at the gate." The boy stared at the coin. "What should I tell her?" "Tell her the king will not return home tonight." "The king, sir?" "Nothing more than that," Cassian said, and the boy took the coin and ran without waiting to be asked twice. Cassian looked once toward Larkspur Street, though Wynne was long out of sight by then. For more than 200 years, the people of his court had called him ruler, protector, and occasionally monster, though never to his face. No one, in all that time, had ever called him a hired guard. He found, to his own quiet surprise, that he preferred it. The Sparrow House leaned toward the street as though it had spent decades listening to every conversation that passed beneath its windows. Its owner, a sharp-eyed widow named Mrs. Odette Gray, knew every guest's schedule and pretended, out of long habit, that she did not. Wynne's room on the 3rd floor held 1 narrow bed, 1 chair, a small desk, and a stove that produced far more smoke than heat. Cassian entered without touching anything, his eyes moving methodically across the space. 1 door, he said, 1 window, and a fire escape just beyond it in the hall. "Does Mrs. Gray lock the back entrance at night?" "She claims that she does." "That means she forgets," he said, and Wynne found herself almost smiling despite everything. "You understood her rather quickly," she said. He moved toward the small desk, where letters, property records, and bank statements were spread across the surface, taken from her father's study before the house had been sealed by the bank's men. "You have read through all of this," he said, more statement than question. "Twice, and found nothing that explains anything. I found debts that make no sense at all. My father was careful with money his whole life. The lawyer, this man Merrow, claims he borrowed against the house 3 separate times." "Do you know this Silas Merrow personally?" Cassian asked, and something in his tone had gone very still. "I know the name only," Wynne said. "How do you know him?" "He has done work over the years for people who prefer that their business remain hidden from view," Cassian said, and offered nothing further, no matter how long Wynne waited for him to continue. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. "My father copied legal documents for old families around Hartwell Falls," she said. "Land deeds, wills, trust papers, the sort of work that pays little but earns trust over the years. People relied on him until, I believe, he found something he was never meant to find. That is what I have come to think happened." Cassian remained beside the window, listening without interrupting. She explained her father's final week, how he had stopped sleeping properly, checked every lock in the house each night before bed, and once stood in the kitchen before sunrise holding a sealed envelope he refused to explain. When she had asked what troubled him, he told her only that once a man sees someone trapped behind a locked door, he cannot simply walk away and pretend he saw nothing. 3 days later, he was dead at his desk. "What became of the envelope?" Cassian asked. "It was gone by the time I was allowed back into the study." "Who arrived at the house first after he died?" "Silas Merrow," she said. "How convenient," Cassian murmured. Wynne looked toward the scattered papers on the desk. "There is one name that appears again and again through all of this: Desmond Kessler." At that name, something in Cassian's stillness changed, subtle enough that most people would have missed it entirely. Wynne did not. "Who is he?" she asked. "A businessman," Cassian said carefully. "He owns roughly half the warehouses along the wharf, and wants the other half, besides. He has also purchased several hundred acres of land north of town, near Thistle Lake." "Those records were among my father's final commissions," Wynne said, moving closer to the desk. He noted here that the land was purchased outright. "He purchased a falsified version of the deed," Cassian said, reading the page over her shoulder. "That land was never meant to be sold to any private buyer, under any circumstance." "How do you know that?" she asked. "I have lived near Hartwell Falls for a very long time," he answered. "That is an answer that answers nothing at all," she said. "For tonight, it will have to be enough," he replied. And though the words offered little comfort, something in the steadiness of his voice made her willing, for the moment, to accept them. She studied him more closely then, the plain coat that was somehow too well made for a man claiming to need employment, The way he read dense legal language without ever slowing his eyes across the page, the odd sense that the room itself seemed to arrange its silence around him rather than the other way around. "What are you hiding?" she finally asked. Cassian met her eyes without flinching. "A great deal," he said. "That does not comfort me in the slightest." "It was not meant to," he admitted. A knock sounded at the door before she could press him further. "Miss Calder," Mrs. Gray called from the hallway. "I have brought up some soup." Cassian raised one finger, a silent request that she stay still, then crossed the room without making a single sound and positioned himself beside the doorframe. "Leave it in the hall, please," Wynne called out. A brief pause followed. "You ought to eat it while it is still warm," Mrs. Gray answered. "I will," Wynne promised, and listened until the landlady's footsteps faded back down the stairs. "Do you truly think she is dangerous?" Wynne whispered once the hallway had gone quiet again. "No," Cassian said. "I think that anyone in this town can be followed without knowing it, and I would rather be careful than sorry." He opened the door, checked the corridor in both directions, and brought the tray inside. The soup was thin but hot, served with a heel of bread and a small note explaining that Wynne could settle the bill later. She offered Cassian half of it without thinking. "I do not require food," he said. "Everyone requires food," she answered. "Not everyone," he said, then paused. "I ate earlier this evening." It was, by any measure, a poor lie, and they both seemed to know it. He accepted the bread anyway, though he never once raised it to his mouth. That night, Wynne slept in the narrow bed, while Cassian remained seated near the door, unmoving, watching the darkness with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that most danger announced itself slowly. She woke once, past midnight, and found him exactly where she had left him hours before, his eyes open, moonlight resting pale against his white hair. For one brief moment, his eyes seemed to burn red rather than brown. She blinked, and the color had settled back into something closer to shadow. "You never sleep," she murmured. "Sometimes," he said. "When?" she asked. "When nothing requires watching." "That sounds like a lonely way to live," she said. "It can be," he admitted, looking toward the window rather than at her. She pulled the thin blanket closer around her shoulders. "My first appointment tomorrow is at 9 o'clock in the morning," she said. "A retired judge named Elias Thorne, who knew my father for many years." "I will come with you," he said. "You are working for me. I did not ask you to sound surprised about it." "I am not surprised," he said. "You simply speak, always as though every sentence has already been approved by a lawyer before it leaves your mouth." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, "that you weigh every word before you offer it, as though the wrong one might cost you something important." He looked at her then, and a quiet, unguarded laugh escaped him, low and brief, the first entirely human sound she had heard him make since they had met that morning. Wynne closed her eyes, and for the first time since her father's death, she slept undisturbed until the gray light of morning found the window. Judge Elias Thorne lived above an old bookshop near the center of Hartwell Falls, in rooms crowded with unopened mail and towers of unread books. He had retired 10 years earlier, but people in town still lowered their voices when they passed beneath his window. Wynne and Cassian left the Sparrow House shortly after 8 o'clock, the streets still slick from the previous night's rain. At the end of Larkspur Street, Cassian took her arm gently but firmly. "Do not turn around," he said quietly. "Someone is following us, a man near the flower cart." "How long has he been there?" Wynne asked, keeping her eyes forward. "Since we left with the boarding house," he answered. "What do we do?" "We let him believe he is doing well at his work," Cassian said, and guided her instead toward the bakery on the corner, through its warm kitchen, and out into the narrow lane that ran behind the bookshop. "You have done this before," Wynne said as they walked. "Yes," he answered. "As a guard?" "No," he said, and offered nothing more, though she noted the answer carefully, the way she noted everything else about him that did not quite add up. They reached the second ladder up through the alley behind the bookshop, and Judge Thorne waited upstairs in a cluttered room, lined with shelves and a small fireplace that had not been swept in some time. He was a thin man with silver spectacles and a voice that had lost none of its old authority, despite his years away from the bench. "Wynne," he said, taking both of her hands in his, "you look more like your mother every season that passes." "Everyone tells me that when they cannot think what else to say," she answered, and the judge gave a tired, genuine smile. "You also speak like your father did, careful and exact." His eyes moved past her to Cassian, standing near the door. "My bodyguard," Wynne said. "Is that truly what he is for now?" The judge asked, studying Cassian with an expression that suggested he already suspected otherwise. "For now," Cassian answered simply, and the judge seemed to understand a great deal more than Wynne did, though he chose to say nothing further about it in that moment. They settled near the fireplace, and Judge Thorne began without preamble. Your father came to see me 2 months before he died, he said. He had discovered a serious problem buried in the records for Thistle Lake. What kind of problem? Wynne asked. The land belonged to a family trust established long before Hartwell Falls became an incorporated town, he explained. The agreement protected the lake itself, the surrounding forest, and several farms that bordered its shore. It could not legally be sold to any private company unless every living heir agreed to the sale, without exception. Desmond Kessler purchased it regardless, Wynne said. He purchased a false version of the agreement, the judge corrected gently. Someone replaced the original trust papers, held in the county archive, with copies that quietly removed that requirement. Your father discovered the original deed while reviewing old court records for an unrelated matter, and he understood immediately what he had found. Where is it now? Wynne asked, leaning forward. He made at least one copy, perhaps more than one, the judge said. Did he tell you where he hid it? No, only that he had placed it inside the thing that helped him remember your mother most clearly. Wynne went very still. Her mother had died when Wynne was 14 years old, and an old clock in the sitting room still played the melody she used to hum while she cooked in the kitchen each evening. The clock, Wynne said softly. Judge Thorne nodded. That was precisely my thought as well, but the house has been sealed by the bank since your father's death. Your housekeeper still has access through the garden gate, he added. Mrs. Doyle. Yes, he said. I sent word to her yesterday afternoon in case you came to me. Wynne rose from her chair. Then we should go there now, she said. The judge caught her wrist gently before she could move further. There is more you should hear first, he said, his expression darkening. A man came to see me not long after your father died, broad through the shoulders with a scar cutting through one eyebrow. He asked me directly what your father might have told me before he passed. What did you tell him? Wynne asked. That I knew nothing at all, the judge said. Did he believe you? No, he did not. Cassian spoke for the first time since they had sat down. Was he alone? He asked. A younger man waited outside on the street, well-dressed, carrying a small leather notebook, the judge said. Desmond Kessler's assistant, Cassian said. Nathaniel Price. Wynne turned toward him sharply. You know him as well? I know Kessler's circle, Cassian said. How closely? She pressed. More closely than I would prefer, he answered, and offered nothing further. Judge Thorne studied Cassian for a long moment. You should tell her the rest of it, he said quietly. I will, Cassian answered. When? When the truth is more likely to help her than to frighten her, he said. Wynne looked between the two men, feeling suddenly very much like an outsider in her own family's crisis. I am standing in a room where both of you seem to know a great deal more about the danger I am in than I do myself, she said. Judge Thorne released her wrist. You are right to say so, he admitted, and reached instead for a pen, scrawling an address onto a scrap of paper. A man named Elliot Marsh keeps private records for people who no longer trust the banks with anything important, he said. If your father found the original deed and made copies, Elliot Marsh may hold one of them now. He hid its location, I believe, because someone within the legal system itself was assisting Kessler from the inside. Silas Merrow, Wynne said. Perhaps, the judge said carefully. Wynne folded the note and slid it into her coat pocket. Judge Thorne looked once more at Cassian before they left. Keep her alive, he said, his voice low and serious. Cassian's expression did not shift at all. She will remain alive, he answered, and something in the certainty of it seemed for the moment to satisfy the old judge completely. Outside, the man who had been watching them near the flower cart was gone, though a dark automobile now waited across the street, its engine idling low. Cassian guided Wynne toward a waiting taxi instead of walking further along the open road. Your father's house first, he said, once they were both seated inside. You agree with the plan now? Wynne asked. I agreed before you had finished asking, he said. As the taxi rolled out of the center of town, the buildings gradually gave way to wet fields and bare autumn trees along the northern road. Who are you? Wynne finally asked, watching him rather than the passing scenery. You hired a man named Cassian Vane, he said. That is a name, not a person, she said. You know Judge Thorne and Kessler, and this business at Thistle Lake far too well for a stranger who only arrived in town yesterday. You do not eat, and you barely sleep. Your hands stay cold no matter the weather, and your eyes changed color last night when I woke and found you watching the door. He remained silent for several long seconds. Should I be afraid of you? She asked at last. No, he said, faster than she expected. Why are you so certain? Because it is the only answer to any of your questions that I am completely certain of, he said. I do not believe everything you tell me, Wynne said, but I believe you want me to stay safe. His expression softened, just slightly. At that for now, he said quietly. That will have to be enough. The Calder house stood at the edge of town beside a lane lined with old maple trees, a bank notice nailed crookedly across the front gate. Wynne did not stop to read it. Mrs. Doyle, the housekeeper who had looked after the family for close to 20 years, opened the garden door before Wynne had even reached the path. She was a short, strong-handed woman whose voice could carry through 3 closed doors without effort. You took far too long, she said, pulling Wynne into a fierce embrace. I have been watching this road since before sunrise. I came as quickly as I was able, Wynne said. Mrs. Doyle looked past her toward Cassian, standing a few respectful steps back. I do not trust handsome men, she announced. That is a sensible policy, Cassian replied with a small bow, and something in his easy manner seemed to soften her, at least a little. You may come inside, she said finally, though I am still watching you. Dust had settled thickly over the kitchen furniture in the weeks since the house had been sealed. Mrs. Doyle led them into the quiet sitting room, where a clock of dark wood stood on the mantel. A small brass moon set into its face. Wynne wound the key with careful, trembling fingers, and a simple melody began to play, slow and worn thin with age. My mother used to sing this song while she cooked, Wynne said quietly. Cassian stood close behind her, close enough that she could feel the faint coolness that always seemed to surround him. She opened the back panel of the clock case, and behind the gears, tucked beneath a narrow strip of cloth, she found a folded paper in her father's careful handwriting. Wynne, trust Elliot Marsh, it read. Ask him for the Thistle Lake record. Do not take it to the police. Bring it instead to someone who cannot be bought. Below that line, in a hand that looked slightly more hurried, her father had written one final sentence. The Pale King still keeps his promise. Wynne read the words twice before she turned to face Cassian. He had gone completely unnaturally still. What does that mean? She asked. I do not know precisely what your father came to believe, he said carefully. That is not what I asked you, Wynne said. You know exactly what he meant by it. Mrs. Doyle looked between the two of them, sensing something pass through the room that she could not quite name. Mrs. Doyle looked at the two of them for a long moment, sensing more than she was being told. Your father trusted this man, she finally said, more to herself than to either of them. He trusted him enough to write those words and hide them where only Wynne would find them, Cassian said carefully. That is not quite the same as an answer, Mrs. Doyle said. No, he agreed, it is not. Wynne folded the note twice more and pressed it flat against her chest, as though the paper itself might steady her heartbeat. Whatever you are, she said quietly to Cassian, my father chose to trust you with something he never even told me. I intend to honor whatever debt that leaves between us, he said. That is not what I asked either, she said, and for a moment the old sitting room held nothing but the slow, patient ticking of the wound clock, and the three of them standing very still around it, none of them quite ready to be the one who spoke next. A sound came from somewhere outside, a car door closing softly on the gravel drive. Cassian crossed to the window and drew the curtain aside by less than an inch. 2 men, he said quietly, one waiting at the front gate, the other moving now toward the garden side. Mrs. Doyle reached immediately for a heavy iron pan resting near the stove. No, Cassian said. Take the back hall. There is a path through the orchard behind the shed. I am not leaving Wynne alone here, Mrs. Doyle said firmly. You will help her far more by leaving now, Cassian answered, and though the older woman looked ready to argue further, Wynne took her hands gently between her own. Go to your sister in Vermont, she said. I will come for you the moment this is finished. I promise you that. Mrs. Doyle's eyes filled, though she nodded, and allowed herself to be led toward the pantry. Cassian guided them both through the back hall and out into the garden, along a narrow orchard path behind the storage shed. At the far fence, Mrs. Doyle turned north toward a neighboring farm, while Wynne and Cassian continued south toward the road where their taxi still waited. A dark automobile appeared near the front gate just as they reached the fence line. Do not run, Cassian said quietly. They will see us if we run. I understand, Wynne whispered. He placed one hand gently against the small of her back. The air around them seemed to change all at once, though there was no wind to explain it, dry leaves lifting slowly from the ground on their own. A low fog began moving between the bare trees, thick enough within moments to hide the entire road from view. Wynne stopped walking, startled. Rowan, keep walking, he said quietly, using her hesitation to guide her forward instead of stopping to explain. The fog closed around them completely, and they reached the waiting taxi without being seen by either man near the gate. Once inside, Wynne turned to face him fully. You did that, she said. It was not a question. He looked straight ahead, toward the front of the car. You brought that fog, she pressed. Yes, he admitted. What are you? she asked. The taxi driver glanced once toward them in the rearview mirror, and Cassian reached forward to raise the glass divider between the front and back seats before he answered her at all. He faced her fully then, and in the dim light of the taxi's interior, his eyes had gone entirely red, not brown at all, no trick of shadow or weather to explain it away. "My name is Cassian Vane," he said, "but I was born Cassian Aldrich Vane, and I have ruled the Vale Court of this region for more than 200 years. Wynne said nothing at all for a long moment. "I am what your stories call a vampire," he said. She looked at his pale skin, his white hair, the unnatural stillness of his hands resting on his knees. "A vampire," she repeated. "Yes. And a king." "Yes," he said again. She studied him for several more seconds before she finally asked, "Do you drink blood?" Cassian looked almost genuinely offended by the bluntness of the question. "That is your first question," he said. "It seemed like an important one," she answered. "I take blood only from willing adults within my own household," he said. "No one is harmed by it, ever. I can walk freely in daylight, and I can call fog for a short while when I need to." "Can you read minds?" she asked. "No," he said. "Good," she said. "Mine is not being particularly polite to you right now." He looked away, fighting visibly against a smile. She held her father's note up between them. "The Pale King still keeps his promise," she read aloud again. "Your father knew who I truly was," Cassian admitted. "How?" she asked. "Many years ago, he protected evidence that saved one of my people from a false accusation that would have ended in her death," he said. "I promised him then that if his family ever needed protection, I would answer that call myself, whatever it cost me." "Did you know who I was that first morning at the employment office?" she asked. "Not immediately," he said. "I understood the moment you spoke your father's name aloud to the clerk." "Then why pretend to be nothing more than a hired guard?" she asked. "Because you needed a guard in that moment, not a king," he said. "You could have simply told me the truth," she said. "Yes," he admitted. "Why did you not?" "Because people behave very differently around kings," he said. "I wanted you to decide for yourself whether you trusted me, before any title made that choice for you instead." She considered this for a long moment. "I am still angry with you," she finally said. "You should be," he answered. "I understand that completely. That is more mercy than I expected from you," he added quietly. "I would not dare offer less," she said, and something in her voice had softened despite everything. The taxi rolled back into the center of Hartwell Falls as the afternoon light began to fade toward evening. "Not yet," Cassian said when Wynne suggested going directly to find Elliot Marsh. "Kessler's men already know we found something at the house," he explained. "Marsh's office will be watched closely tonight. We need allies before we move any further." "Vampire allies," she said. "Some of them," he admitted. "Are they all as difficult as you?" she asked. "No," he said. "That is a relief." "They are worse," he said, and for the first time since the courthouse steps, Wynne laughed despite everything, a short surprised sound that seemed to catch them both off guard. Cassian brought her to a quiet house above the wharf, every curtain drawn closed despite the daylight still lingering outside. A woman named Seraphine Noor opened the door before either of them had knocked, silver rings catching the last of the light, her expression suggesting Cassian had missed an appointment by roughly 50 years. "You left Northridge without your guard," she said. "Yes," he answered. "You vanished from your own house without a word of warning." "Yes." "And you sent a child to tell me the king would simply be delayed," she continued. "He was efficient for the purpose," Cassian said mildly. Seraphine's gaze moved to Wynne, appraising her carefully. "This is the reason," Cassian said before she could ask. "Wynne Calder, daughter of Aldrich Calder." Something shifted in Seraphine's expression at the name, and she stepped back at last to let them both inside. Two others waited within the front room. Owen Baxter, a former town constable with a steady, careful gaze, and Junie Farrow, who owned the playhouse near the square and seemed delighted by every fresh secret entering the room. Cassian explained the deed, the threats against Wynne, and the address for Elliot Marsh's office on Wharf Lane. When he finished, Junie poured tea for everyone without being asked. "So the king took on paying work," she said, amused. "For $20, Wynne corrected. He is still owed 5 of it. Junie stared at Cassian with open delight. "I will remember this for the rest of my very long life," she said. "That may well be a very long time indeed," Seraphine said dryly. Owen unrolled a map of the town across the low table between them. "Marsh works out of a narrow office on Wharf Lane," he said, tapping the location. "Kessler has men posted at both ends of the street already." "Can we reach him after dark without being seen?" Wynne asked. Junie tapped a spot further along the map. "The playhouse basement connects to an old delivery tunnel," she said. "It comes out directly behind Marsh's building." "Why does a theater have a smuggling tunnel?" Owen asked. "Not for the first time, apparently." "It is a theater," Junie said with a shrug. We need somewhere to hide the bad reviews. Seraphine looked toward Cassian. Marrow has also filed a request to search Wynne's room at the boarding house, she said. Can he legally do that? Wynne asked. Not truly, Owen said, but he has a judge willing to sign whatever paper is placed in front of him. How soon? Wynne asked. By morning, most likely, Seraphine said. Then we go tonight, Wynne said firmly. Cassian shook his head slightly. You will remain here, he said. No, Cassian, you hired me to protect you, not to replace you in your own fight, she said. This is not an ordinary appointment any longer. Nothing about you has ever been ordinary, he said, and Junie hid a smile behind her teacup. My father left this message for me specifically, Wynne continued. Elliot Marsh may refuse to hand the record over to anyone else at all. Cassian looked around the room, searching for support, and found none offered to him. You are all remarkably disloyal, he said. We are loyal enough to tell you plainly when you are wrong, Seraphine answered, and the matter was settled. While Owen and Junie worked out the finer points of the route, Wynne drew Seraphine aside near the window. What is he to the people who bowed to him tonight? She asked quietly. Seraphine considered the question carefully before answering. He is the reason our kind has survived in this region at all, without slaughter on either side, she said. His father ruled through fear alone, and it nearly destroyed the entire court 2 centuries ago, when a mob burned half of Northridge to the ground in a single night. Cassian rebuilt what was left of us from almost nothing. He negotiated the Thistle Lake Accord himself, family by family, over the better part of 30 years, so that no child of ours would ever again have to hide what they were from a neighbor who might otherwise reach for a torch. That does not sound like a burden he carries lightly, Wynne said. It is not, Seraphine agreed. He has buried more people he loved than any king should ever have to bury. And he has done it while keeping his face perfectly composed in front of every single one of us, because a court in mourning is a court that looks weak to its enemies. Why tell me this now? Wynne asked. Because you asked, Seraphine said simply, and because I have watched him for a very long time, and I have never once seen him choose to be seen the way he has let you see him these past 2 days. That should mean something to you, whatever you decide to do with it. Wynne looked across the room to where Cassian stood beside Owen, tracing a possible route along the map with one careful finger, entirely unaware he was being discussed. He asked nothing of me in return for any of this, she said. He would not, Seraphine said. That has always been both his great strength and his great failing. Someone eventually has to ask him what he needs, because he has never once learned how to ask for it himself. They made their plan for the evening. After sunset, Junie would draw a crowd outside her playhouse with the promise of free music and warm cider. Owen would watch the street from a distance. Seraphine would wait near the wharf in case anything went wrong, and Cassian and Wynne would use the tunnel beneath the theater. While they waited for the light to fade, Wynne sat near the kitchen window with a cup of coffee cooling slowly between her hands. Cassian joined her after a while, standing near the doorway before finally taking the seat across from her. You truly never eat, she asked again. I can, he said. It simply does very little for me either way. What does the coffee do for you then? She asked, sliding the cup toward him. Makes me feel included, he admitted, and took a small sip. His face changed almost immediately. You dislike it a great deal, she said, laughing. Then why do you keep drinking it? He asked, setting the cup down carefully. You are watching me, she said. He glanced away, and something in his stillness seemed almost bashful. You should do that more often, he said quietly. Drink terrible coffee. Laugh the way you did earlier tonight. The kitchen fell quiet around them for a moment. My father used to tell terrible jokes whenever I was worried about something, she said. I always told him to stop. Did he ever stop? Cassian asked. Never once, she said, smiling despite the ache behind it. You miss him, he said, every single hour, she admitted. Cassian rested his hands flat on the table between them. I lost my own family a very long time ago, he said. How long? She asked gently. My mother and my younger brother died more than 200 years past, he said. I am sorry, she said. I still think of them nearly every day, he admitted. Does time make any of it easier? She asked. No, he said honestly. What does time do then? She asked. At first, he said, grief fills every room in the house completely. Later, it settles into only certain rooms, a particular song, a certain chair, one cold winter morning each year. That sounds worse somehow, she said. It is not, he said. The other rooms are eventually given back to you. She studied his face carefully in the low kitchen light. For a king, he looked profoundly tired in that moment. For a vampire, he looked almost painfully human. Why were you truly at the employment office that first morning? She finally asked. I had heard that Kessler was hiring men through that office for work meant to stay well outside the law, he said. I wanted to learn who among them was involved without drawing any attention to my own interest in the matter. So meeting me was simply an accident, she said. Yes, he answered. Do you regret it, she asked. No, he said, the answer immediate and quiet all at once. Something warm moved through Wynne then, something that did not belong beside the fear and grief she had carried for 3 long weeks, and yet had settled there anyway, uninvited. Junie appeared in the doorway a short while later, wearing a wide red hat with a single feather. It is time, she announced. Cassian stood at once. Wynne tucked her father's folded note safely inside her coat and followed him out into the gathering dark. Evening had fully settled over Hartwell Falls by then, and this time she walked into that darkness beside a king, rather than a stranger. Junie's playhouse stood only 2 blocks from Wharf Lane. By 8 o'clock, a line of curious townspeople had already formed outside, drawn in by promises of free music and warm cider, most of them having no idea what they were truly waiting for, though it hardly seemed to matter to any of them. Wynne and Cassian slipped in through the backstage entrance and descended into the basement below. Junie lifted a trap door hidden beneath a stack of old wooden chairs. Follow the tunnel until you reach the second ladder, she instructed. The first opens into a bakery further down the lane. What happens if we choose the wrong one? Wynne asked. You steal some bread and simply try again, Junie said with a shrug. The tunnel beneath them smelled of wet stone and salt air drifting in from the wharf. Cassian walked ahead carrying a small lantern, Wynne close behind him. You can see perfectly well in the dark, she said. Yes, he admitted. Then why carry the lantern at all? She asked. You cannot see without it, he said simply. That was surprisingly thoughtful of you, she said. I have my moments, he answered. They reached the second ladder and climbed up into a cramped storage room behind Elliot Marsh's office. A thin line of light showed beneath the inner door. Cassian knocked twice, and when no answer came, Wynne unfolded her father's note and called softly through the wood. Mr. Marsh, my name is Wynne Calder. Aldrich Calder sent me to you. I need the Thistle Lake record. A lock turned slowly on the other side. Elliot Marsh opened the door himself, an older man with white sideburns and a wool vest buttoned slightly askew. Come in quickly, he whispered, glancing past them down the tunnel. His small office was crowded with labeled metal boxes and locked drawers stacked along every wall. He looked once at Cassian and went noticeably pale. Your Majesty, he said. Wynne turned toward Cassian in surprise. You know him too, she asked. Most people who handle old Hartwell Falls records know exactly who protects the agreements made after dark, Cassian said quietly. Marsh crossed to a floor safe set into the corner. Your father brought this to me roughly 6 weeks before he passed, he said, turning the dial with practiced fingers. He believed Desmond Kessler had found a way to erase both the human and the Twilight claims to Thistle Lake at once. What are Twilight claims? Wynne asked. The lake shelters one of the very few protected places where humans and vampires have lived under the same shared agreement for generations, Marsh explained and lifted a flat wooden case from the safe. Cassian took the case first, then passed it directly to Wynne. Inside, she found the original trust deed, her father's own written report, and a sealed letter addressed to the state attorney general. The deed listed the human families of the region, the surrounding farms, and something called the Thistle Lake Accord. My family's name is on this list, Cassian said quietly, reading over her shoulder. The lake can never be developed or closed to either community under its terms. Kessler wants to build factories there instead, Marsh said grimly. He would drain the wetland entirely and force every family nearby off the land, Cassian said. He wants control above all else, he added. People like him always begin by deciding who does not belong somewhere. Marsh handed Wynne one final envelope. Your father left this here as well, he said. She opened it with trembling hands. Wynne, if you are reading this, I am sorry I did not tell you everything sooner, the letter read. I wanted to keep you well outside of this danger. I understand now that silence can become its own kind of danger, just as real as any other. Trust your own judgment. Ask for help when you need it. Do not let fear be the thing that chooses your life for you. Wynne read the words until they blurred together completely. Cassian stood beside her without speaking a single word. A sound came suddenly from the front office, someone testing the outer door. Marsh closed the safe quickly. They are here far earlier than expected, he whispered. Cassian blew out the lantern at once. Stay close behind me, he said. Wynne touched his sleeve. No fighting, please. Not unless there is truly no other choice left to us. A voice called through the door. Mr. Marsh, open this door at once. We have legal authority to search these premises. Marsh whispered back. They have no such authority, not truly. Cassian moved toward the window. We leave through the roof, he said. There is no roof exit from this building, Marsh said. There is now, Cassian answered, and lifted the window sash, studying the narrow gap between the buildings across from them. We cannot possibly jump that distance, Wynne said. I can, he said simply. That does not help me at all, she said. He turned his back toward her. Hold on to me, and do not look down, he said. Wynne stared at him. You are entirely serious, she said. The front door of the office shook hard on its hinges. Wynne wrapped her arms tightly around his shoulders as Cassian climbed onto the window ledge. Do not look down, he repeated. That advice has never once helped anyone, she said, and he stepped out into open air, landing on the opposite roof without a single sound. You can fly, she gasped. Not exactly, he said. I simply jump and jump well. Of course you do, she said breathlessly. Marsh crossed behind them on a wooden plank. Cassian pulled into place between the buildings, and together they hurried across the rooftops and down a rusted fire escape, where Owen waited to lead them quickly to Seraphine's waiting car. As the car pulled away from the curb, Wynne held the wooden case tightly against her chest. You have it, Seraphine said, glancing back once. We have it, Wynne answered. Cassian looked through the rear window toward the street behind them. They are following us, he said. Seraphine pressed harder on the gas pedal. I was rather hoping they might, she said, and steered the car between the warehouses along the wharf and up a private lane Wynne had never noticed before. The dark car followed them all the way until a set of iron gates opened before a stone house glowing with warm light from every window. Dozens of people waited across the courtyard beyond the gates, some clearly human, others clearly not. The pursuing car stopped just outside, unwilling or unable to pass through. Cassian stepped out of Seraphine's car and stood tall in the gateway, white hair loose around his shoulders, his eyes clear and red in the darkness. Every person in the courtyard bowed at once. Wynne remained standing beside him and did not bow at all. The men in the dark car made no move to enter. Cassian looked toward them evenly. Tell Desmond Kessler, he said, his voice carrying easily across the entire courtyard, that Wynne Calder is under the protection of this house. The Thistle Lake deed will reach the State Attorney General's office before the sun rises tomorrow morning. The car reversed slowly and disappeared back down the lane. Wynne watched it go, then turned to look at Cassian. The protection of this house, she repeated. It sounds far grander than it actually is, he said. Everyone just bowed to you, she said. You own an entire castle. It is simply a large house with several unnecessary towers, he said, and Wynne found herself smiling despite the exhaustion pulling at every part of her. Cassian looked at her as though that smile mattered a great deal more to him than the recovered deed ever could. Come inside, he said quietly. You are safe here now. Wynne stepped through the gate, and for the first time in 3 long weeks, she found that she truly believed him. Vane Hall proved quieter inside than Wynne had expected. There were no coffins, no chains, nothing to match stories she had grown up hearing whispered around town. Instead, there were books, old family portraits along the halls, and a kitchen where a human cook complained loudly that nobody in the house ever properly appreciated a good breakfast. A young woman named Prudence, human by the look of her and no older than 20, showed Wynne to her room and lingered a moment in the doorway. My grandmother worked in this house before me, she said, when Wynne asked how long her family had served here. She always said the king kept better company than most of the town did, whatever they whispered about him at the market. Do you believe her? Wynne asked. I have never once been afraid here, Prudence said simply, and left it at that before slipping back down the hall. Later, passing the kitchen, Wynne overheard 2 of the household staff arguing cheerfully over whether the king preferred his study aired out in the mornings or left closed against the cold, a small ordinary disagreement that told her more about the shape of his daily life than anything he had said to her directly. It struck her, standing unseen in that hallway, that a man 2 centuries old had still built himself a house full of small arguments about window latches and breakfast, the same as anyone else might. Wynne was given a room overlooking the dark forest beyond the estate, though she found she could not sleep at all. Near midnight, she found Cassian in the library, standing before a large map of Thistle Lake pinned to the wall. You should rest, he said without turning. You say that quite often for someone who never rests himself, she answered. He moved a small marker across the map. The Attorney General's office will receive the documents by morning, he said. Owen is carrying copies to 2 separate newspapers tonight as well. Kessler cannot make every version of this simply disappear. What happens to Silas Merrow? She asked. He will be investigated thoroughly, Cassian said. And Kessler himself? If the records hold up as they should, he will lose the land entirely and likely face charges of fraud besides. Wynne sat at the long table near the window. My father's death, she said quietly. Cassian's expression changed. We have no proof that Kessler caused it directly, he said carefully. But you believe he did, she pressed. I believe your father was placed under enormous pressure, he said. Perhaps threatened outright, perhaps given something that worsened a heart already weakened by years of worry. I wanted a clear answer, she said. I know, he said gently. I thought that finding the deed would make everything simple again, she admitted. It rarely works that way, he said. She looked at him then. Kings must dislike uncertainty a great deal, she said. Kings live inside uncertainty most of the time, he answered, and sat across from her. Without his heavy coat, he wore only plain dark clothes and a thin silver ring marked with a small crescent moon. Why do you hide yourself away, she finally asked. From humans? From everyone entirely? He looked toward the tall shelves lining the room. My father believed that distance made a ruler strong, he said. He spoke to his own people only through advisors, and he punished mistakes he never once tried to understand. And you, she said. I promised myself I would be different, he said. Then I became so careful, so guarded, that I built an entirely new kind of distance in its place. You walked into an employment office without your title, she said, and found you instead, he said. Yes, he admitted. When did you decide to protect me, she asked. Because of your father's promise, or because of something else? He met her eyes steadily. On the courthouse steps that very first morning, he said. That early, she said, surprised. You had $20, no clear plan at all, and enough fear in you to make most people simply hide away and wait for the danger to pass, he said. Instead, you hired a complete stranger and kept asking every question anyway. That sounds fairly reckless, she said. It was, he agreed. It was also brave, he added quietly. Wynne looked down before he could see how deeply those words had landed. Somewhere in the house, a clock sounded softly. You called me remarkable once, back at the boarding house, she said. I remember saying it, he answered. You say things like that and then act as though you said nothing at all afterward, she said. I have had very little practice with compliments, he admitted. Or with wanting someone to stay, he added, more quietly still. The room fell silent between them. Wynne raised her eyes to his. I do not know what happens after tomorrow, she said. I do not know whether I can fully trust a king, or a vampire, or a man who drinks terrible coffee, simply because I am watching him do it. That last part was genuinely difficult, he said, and she almost laughed despite the weight of the moment. But I know exactly how I feel whenever you leave a room, she continued. He looked up at her. How, he asked. Less safe, she admitted, his expression tightened slightly. That may simply be gratitude, he said. And quieter, she went on, ignoring him, too quiet to be only that. Cassian, she said, I am not asking you for a promise that has to last forever. For me, he said carefully, promises tend to last exactly that long. Then do not make one tonight, she said, and held out her hand instead. Walk with me, she said. Where? He asked. Outside, she said. I have been trapped indoors for weeks now, and I would like to simply breathe. Cassian took her hand. His skin was cool as always, though his grip was careful, deliberate, as though he were holding something he did not want to break. They walked together through the sleeping house and out into the wide garden beyond it. Moonlight rested pale across the trees. The air smelled of pine and wet earth after the earlier rain. Wynne expected him to release her hand once they reached the garden path. He did not. They came at last to a stone bench beside a small, dark pond. Do vampires feel the cold? She asked, settling beside him. Not often, he said. Do you feel fear? She asked. Yes, he admitted. What are you afraid of tonight? She asked. He looked down at their joined hands. That I will become another person who decides your future for you without asking, he said. Then ask me, she said simply. What do you want? He took a long moment before answering. I want you to stay in my life, he finally said. The words were simple, and that made them somehow harder to dismiss. Wynne sat with them for a while. I can stay through breakfast, she said at last. A small smile broke across his face. That is a beginning, he said. She rested her head gently against his shoulder. He went very still beside her. You may breathe if you like, she said. I do not need to, he answered. You understand what I mean, she said. He let out a slow breath anyway. They sat together beside the pond until the moon finally slipped behind the tree line, and nothing more was promised between them that night. Simply being there together, it seemed, was enough for both of them. The news reached Vane Hall shortly after 9 o'clock the following morning. The state attorney general's office had formally accepted the Thistle Lake documents. A judge had suspended every one of Kessler's development permits and blocked the search order against Wynne entirely. By noon, Silas Merrow had vanished from his office without a word to anyone. By evening, the Hartwell Falls Herald had printed the first story about altered land records, hidden heirs, and a quiet clerk who had left proof of it all behind before his death. The article made no mention of vampires at all. It referred to Cassian only as an unnamed local patron of the town. Junie read the line aloud during dinner at Vane Hall. "You have become a donation plaque," she announced. "I prefer it to being called a Vampire King in print," Cassian said. "I certainly do not," Junie said. "Vampire King sells far more theater tickets." For the first time in what felt like weeks, Wynne finished an entire meal without once losing her appetite halfway through it. The investigation moved quickly after that. Kessler's own workers began giving statements to the authorities. A clerk admitted that Merrow had paid him directly to replace the original county records, and Nathaniel Price eventually surrendered his private notebooks rather than face prosecution alone. Kessler denied every accusation at first, then quietly resigned from his business holdings and left Hartwell Falls under close legal supervision, never to be seen in town again. The truth about Aldrich Calder's death proved far harder to settle completely. The physician admitted that Merrow had blocked a full and proper examination at the time, though records also showed that Aldrich had lived with a weakened heart for several years before he died. Wynne never received the clear, certain answer she had wanted so badly. She learned only that her father had been watched closely in his final weeks, and that he had still managed to protect the deed anyway, at whatever cost it demanded of him. It hurt to accept that, but it also, slowly, let her breathe again. 10 days after the Herald story ran, Wynne walked back to the little rooms above the bookshop to see Judge Thorne one final time before the season turned. She found him sorting through the same tower of unopened mail, though he looked lighter somehow, less burdened than he had that first cold morning. "You did what your father could not finish," he told her, taking both her hands the way he had before. "He tried, for years, to protect this town quietly, from the inside, the way a careful man protects things. You protected it loudly, in the open, and perhaps that was always what this particular fight required." "I had help he never had," Wynne said, glancing toward the window where Cassian waited patiently on the street below, pretending with visible effort not to watch for trouble. "Your father knew exactly what kind of help that was, and chose not to use it himself for years, out of some sense that the debt was already too large to call in," the judge said. "I have often wondered whether that restraint was wisdom or simply pride." "Perhaps some of both," Wynne said. The judge smiled at that, faintly. "He would be proud of you regardless, whichever it was," he said. "Not for finding the deed, for asking for help when you needed it, when he could not bring himself to do the same." Wynne carried those words with her back down to the street and found that they settled somewhere useful, somewhere the note from the clock and the letter from Elliot Marsh had not quite reached. It was not the answer she had gone looking for on the courthouse steps weeks earlier, but it was, she was beginning to understand, its own kind of answer all the same. Several weeks later, the bank formally withdrew its claim against the Calder house. The original loan documents, it turned out, had been forged alongside the Thistle Lake papers, part of the very same scheme. Wynne returned to the house with Mrs. Doyle on a cold, bright morning. The old clock had stopped, and dust still covered the sitting room furniture. Mrs. Doyle threw open every curtain in the house at once. "This house needs people living in it again," she declared. "It has people," Wynne said. "It needs more than that," Mrs. Doyle said firmly. "Are you volunteering for the position?" Wynne asked. "I never actually left," the older woman said, and they spent the rest of the day cleaning together, room by room. Cassian arrived that afternoon without any of his usual guards, carrying 2 bags of groceries. Mrs. Doyle spotted him through the window first. "The handsome one is back," she announced. "He has a name," Wynne reminded her. "I know it," Mrs. Doyle said. "I remain suspicious regardless." "You brought food," Wynne said when he came inside. "I was told humans require it regularly," he said. "Your research has improved considerably," she said. "Seraphine informed me," he admitted. "That would explain why it is actually useful information," Wynne said, and they worked together until sunset. Cassian repaired a broken cabinet hinge in the kitchen, while Wynne discovered, somewhat to her amusement, that vampire kings were not naturally gifted with hand tools. "You bent the screw," she pointed out. "It was a weak screw," he insisted. "You bent 3 of them," she said. "It was a poor set of screws altogether," he said, and Mrs. Doyle finally took the screwdriver away from him entirely. "Go carry something heavy instead," she instructed, and he obeyed without complaint. Later that evening, Wynne wound the old clock and her mother's song filled the sitting room once again. "My father believed you would keep your promise to him," she said. "I only wish he had asked me for help sooner," Cassian said. "He wanted to protect me from all of it," she said. So did you. In your own way, he pointed out. You made exactly the same mistake he did. Yes, she admitted. At least you are capable of learning from it, he said. Slowly, she agreed, smiling. Wynne walked over to where he stood. The families around Thistle Lake want me to organize their old records properly in the front room of this house, she said. That work suits you well, he said. I will need shelves built for it, she said. I can send someone skilled to help with that, he offered quickly. No, she said. You can help me build them yourself. He glanced toward the bent screws still sitting on the counter. Perhaps I truly should send someone else instead, he said. You are not escaping that easily, she said, taking his hand. Stay for dinner, she added. I do not require dinner, he reminded her. Drink bad coffee instead then, she said. That seems rather cruel of you, he said. It is, she agreed, and he stayed anyway. By the following winter, Wynne had fully opened the Thistle Lake record office inside the front room of her father's house. Farmers brought their old deeds in for safekeeping, families brought wills and letters, and both human and vampire residents of the region brought forward agreements that had sat locked away in drawers for generations. Cassian visited twice each week, sometimes still as king, though more often simply as himself, dressed in a plain coat with nothing to mark him as anything unusual at all. Hartwell Falls came to know him as Wynne's quiet partner, though no two people in town ever quite agreed on what exactly his work involved. Mrs. Gray at the Sparrow House was convinced he owned some manner of funeral business. Mr. Hollis at the employment office claimed he had always known Cassian was someone important. Junie told anyone who would listen the actual truth, with such theatrical excitement that nobody in town ever believed a word of it. In early spring, nearly a full year after that first morning on the courthouse steps, Wynne and Cassian walked together out to Thistle Lake. The old fences were gone completely. Children played freely along the shoreline, and workers repaired the community hall beneath a canopy of fresh new leaves. Standing beside the water, Cassian finally asked, "What happens now, with the lake, with the both of us?" He asked it without any command in his voice, without any certainty either. "I keep my work here," she said. "Yes." "I do not move into your tower," she added. "They are unnecessary towers," he agreed. "I visit you as often as I choose to, on my own terms. And you stop pretending that protecting me means keeping every difficult truth locked away from me," she said. "I will try my best," he said. "Try harder than that," she said. "I will," he promised. Wynne stepped closer to him. "What do you want?" she asked. "You," he answered, without a single moment of hesitation. "Not as someone you saved, and not simply as part of an old promise you made to my father," she said. "No," he agreed. "Then as what?" she asked. He touched her cheek gently. "As the woman who hired a king for $20 and still expects the remaining $5, he said. Wynne laughed and kissed him then, gently and only briefly. When she pulled back, he looked genuinely surprised. "You truly have had very little practice," she said. "With being kissed beside a public lake, and feeling this happy about it," he said, considering the thought carefully. "Yes," he admitted. "Then we can practice as often as you like," she said, and took his hand as they walked on together along the shore while the whole town worked busily around them. No one bowed to him there, and no one ran from him either. Cassian seemed entirely glad, in that moment, to be nothing more than a man walking beside the woman he loved. A full year after that, Wynne stood outside the newly finished Thistle Lake Community Hall, while families carried boxes of old records into the freshly built archive room. The building, once marked for demolition entirely, now had fresh paint, a repaired roof, and 3 careful copies of every deed stored separately for safekeeping. Children ran between the long tables. Mrs. Doyle directed the volunteers like a seasoned army commander. Junie sold tickets to a play that had not technically been written yet. Owen argued cheerfully with the printer over typeface. Seraphine watched it all unfold from the porch with quiet satisfaction. Cassian stood near the water in his dark coat, his white hair moving gently in the breeze. He no longer hid himself from the people gathered there. Some still called him the Vampire King. Most by then simply called him Cassian. Wynne joined him by the water's edge. "You are avoiding the work again," she said. "I personally supervised 6 entire boxes," he said. "That is a very royal way of describing avoiding actual work," she said. He held out a small envelope toward her. "What is this?" she asked. "The $5 I have owed you for over a year now," he said. She opened it and found an old bill folded inside, along with a short note. "Payment completed," it read. "Contract extended by mutual agreement." Wynne looked up at him. "How long is this extension meant to last?" she asked. "That depends entirely on you," he said. "Another year then," she said. "Only one more year," he asked. "Ask me again next spring," she said. "I am a patient man," he said. "You are an impossible man," she said. I have also improved considerably with screws, he added. You destroyed an entire shelf just last month, she reminded him. That shelf lacked proper character to begin with, he said, and she shook her head, laughing, and looked out over the water. For years she had believed the future would eventually arrive as one clear, certain answer, that some single-day fear would simply end. Grief would quietly close its door for good, and every missing piece of her old life would return exactly to where it belonged. Life had never actually worked that way, not once. Some questions about her father would remain unanswered forever. Some mornings would still begin, without warning, with the sharp shape of his absence. Cassian would go on carrying centuries of memory she could barely begin to imagine, and she would go on reminding him, again and again, that love was never meant to be simply another form of protection. And yet the house stood open again. The lake belonged fully to its own people once more. Friends filled rooms that had gone silent for far too long. When she looked ahead now, she no longer expected a perfectly smooth road. She saw instead ordinary work, small arguments, shared bad coffee, repaired shelves, and one pale hand always waiting patiently beside her own. That, she had finally come to understand, was enough. Closing reflection, I think what stays with me most about Wynne and Cassian is not the fog, or the rooftop leap, or even the king kneeling to a woman he had only just met on a courthouse step. It is the ordinary part that comes after, the bent screws, the bad coffee, the slow work of building shelves for other people's old papers. I have noticed, over years of collecting stories like this one, that we tend to treat love as a rescue, as though the right person arrives, and the danger simply ends, and the grief simply closes its door, and we get to walk the rest of the way down a smooth and certain road. Wynne wanted that too, at first. She wanted one clear answer about her father, one moment where the fear finally stopped asking anything more of her. She never got it, not really. What she got instead was a man willing to sit beside a locked door with her, night after night, without pretending he could open it for her by himself. That is closer, I think, to how it actually works for most of us. The people I have loved longest were never the ones who solved my grief for me. They were the ones who stayed in the room while I carried it, who let me be angry with them without leaving, who showed up with groceries even after I had already told them I could manage on my own. There is a particular kind of courage in that, quieter than any rooftop leap, and it rarely gets written into the exciting parts of a story. It shows up instead in the small, repeated choices, choosing to stay for breakfast, choosing to answer honestly instead of comfortably, choosing to hand someone the last $5 you owe them, even after the debt has stopped mattering to either of you. If you are further along in life than Wynne was that morning on the courthouse steps, you have likely already learned what she spends this whole story discovering, that some questions never get answered the way we want them to, and we have to build a life around that unanswered space, rather than waiting for it to close. I find at my own age that this is not really a tragedy. The room's grief once filled completely do shrink, slowly into a single chair, a single song, one cold morning each year. And the rest of the house does eventually get given back to you, exactly as Cassian promised her by that pond. What fills those other rooms again is rarely dramatic. It is a housekeeper who never truly leaves, a friend who sells tickets to a play not yet written, a hand that stays cool and steady beside yours through every ordinary evening that follows. I hope, whatever door you happen to be sitting beside tonight, that you have someone willing to wait there with you too, patient, unhurried, in no rush at all to call it finished.